Hey, Redemption Church and Friends Redemption Church, Pastor Matt here with a new and improved building update. Now, it was only like 2 weeks ago where I shared kind of our recent set of challenges with the building, that the price tag was higher than anticipated. And from that, the challenges were more exhaustive than what we would have desired. And from that, I just simply let us all know, like, hey, if we're going to see this go forward, we have a limited timeline of between now and next June of 2023. And at that point, there's no way to move forward with the project because of the wetland ordinances. The amount of money that we would need to raise to get to that, kind of finally getting underway with it, would be about $2.1 million that we would need to raise. And that would be between now and roughly April, because you can't just get everything underway in a week. We'd have to be able to prove that we have the funds to do this roughly sometime in the spring. And so we had like this really daunting thing, right? And so I shared that, and then it's like, okay, God, what do you want us to do next? Well, in the meantime, some things have happened that are super cool and yet also have some challenge. And yet that's what I love about things like this. Like, there's something about the fact that when you don't just have something handed to you, but you still got to sort of work towards something, even though it's an exciting opportunity, there's something where God really does some great stuff in that. And that's what's even happened in about the last week and a half or so. So basically, here's the long story short. I'm going to give the long story short for people that want just the bottom line. And then for everybody who wants the details, stick around in the video and I'll walk through some of the details, try to guess some of the questions you might have, and give you a little bit more of the thinking that our leadership had to work through in putting this idea together. But the long story short, as far as both what the new opportunity is and what it's going to take for us to actually access this opportunity, has everything to do with a denomination known as the Assemblies of God. And so basically, our project manager, who's been helping us for the last number of years, she's actually connected to the Assemblies of God. When we ran into the challenges with the bank and the appraisal and everything else, she reached out to her denomination because she knows that they will, on occasion, lend to churches that are not Assembly of God churches. And kind of by way of that relationship and by way of us giving our financial information to the Assemblies of God, kind of powers that be, their finance lending arm, they decided that they were willing to come in and lend us the difference of what we need to build the facility. And so that was huge, right? Because I shared that a little bit in the video, that we were in some preliminary talks with them, and I really anticipated them coming back saying, you guys do not have enough money to pull this off, and so we'll meet you somewhere in the middle, but we can't go the full way. And instead, we have a kind of an initial agreement that they're looking at, and they say, yeah, we think we can do this with you, but there's some things that we will need to do to make this fully happen. And that's kind of what this is all about today. And so the kind of get to the bottom line of it, here's what it is, and this is where it's like a challenge. But what I also know about Redemption Church in the history of challenges that come before us is every time there is a challenge like this, you all are amazing. You step up, you do it big, and you hit the targets every single time. And this one is going to be some heavy lifting target. But here's what it is in the just reduced down to the simplest model. Here's what we're looking at. To be able to make this happen, what we need to do between now, as you're watching this video, and October 1st, so roughly 7 weeks, is we need to raise, ready? $750,000 in 7 weeks. Now, in one sense you go, that seems daunting, but you know what? Last video was 2.1 million by spring. Suddenly this feels a whole lot more manageable, right? But here's the thing behind this, right? So basically the denomination said, hey, we're willing to do this, but we also know that the monthly payment to service this loan is about $30,000 a month. That's what's going to cost us as a church, right? And so what we then need to do is to figure out a way to manage that monthly payment for a handful of years as we're getting everything up to speed. And the way we want to do that is to raise what we're calling like a rainy day fund right now, so that it insulates the church and its overall budget and its overall functioning for at least 2 years, in essence, right, to really get the church underway, up to speed, the building built, and from that gaining more traction and more opportunity to be able to bring the kingdom and the gospel to our community in a variety of ways. And so the challenge that I'm really kind of giving for the bottom line is that we want to raise $750,000 between now and October 1st. And if that can happen, realistically, we will also be breaking ground this year. All right. So all of this would happen rapidly. And I'll go a step further. If we hit the 750 before October 1st, that accelerates when we'll actually break ground. So our general contractor is ready to go. Our first wave of permits should be coming through here at the end of this week. And so the quicker we're to that number, the quicker we can get all the pieces in place and get underway, and we can start seeing awesome things happen right down there on Main Street and our future space for all of our ministry suite that we hope to see accomplished. And so that is our challenge. That is our new goal, is to raise $750,000 in the next 7 weeks. Now, in this, I want to be clear about a couple of other things. It would be great to go beyond 750, because if we do, all that money that goes beyond that number will go toward the loan that we would be taking on, which is roughly about, right now it's a $4.7 million loan. But that number is actually going to come down, because when the denomination looked at our information, they were taking the bottom line original number before costs were peeled out for what we've already paid. So the total project is at $8.1 million, but we've already paid $400,000 toward that $8.1 million. So it's down to kind of going forward, it takes about $7.7 million to finish the project. We would be bringing in $3.5 million to that. And so the difference is what the loan would be with the denomination. And from that, it's a $30,000 a month payment. You kind of get the idea there. So some of these numbers are going to adjust a little bit. But if we raise more than $750,000, anything above that, we're just going to apply toward the loan instantly. Now, in this, I want to say something else that's really clear. If you are a person that has the capacity or the desire to just give a large gift to apply toward reducing the loan amount, that would be fantastic. And so I'm painting this target for all of us at $750,000. But in that, man, if you want to give more, we'll just, again, we're going to apply that toward reducing the loan amount, and that would be fantastic. I would add to that, if you're somebody that says, yeah, we want to give a large amount, the best way to do that for us is in the form of a check, because we don't have to pay financing charges on checks. Like if it comes through as credit cards or electronic formats, a lot of times you have to pay financing charges, and that just takes away from what we can utilize toward the building. And so if you're somebody that's feeling led in this time to go, wow, this is the final push and we want to do something big in this context, that would be an awesome way to do it. So our minimum is $750. The maximum is, hey, let's just go ahead and do the whole rest to be done. That would be awesome. I could totally get behind that, but I want to kind of keep it in the scope of what's real for us right now. $750,000 is what is real. And in this, here's the other thing I want to stress. That $750 is kind of don't necessarily say, oh, so we're going to take all of our general giving and we're all just going to apply it toward the building fund for the next 7 weeks and get that $750 up. We need to kind of do both. We need to maintain our operating budget, and then in addition to that, raise $750,000, all right? Because kind of from a monthly perspective, really what the denomination is looking at, what we're looking at as leaders, is saying our general giving overall every month needs to be about $90,000 a month to do all of our ministries, to fund everything like normal, and also to make the building payment, right? If we were bringing in $90,000 a month, all of that could be done in one nut, right? But on average for 2022, we've been bringing in about $70,000. And so we're $20,000 shy of what that target is. And so by raising this large sum of money now, that gives us the cushion to augment that difference of $20,000 for the next 2 to 3 years, kind of depending on certain dynamics in that. So what we're talking about is right now raising a fund that augments those differences, allows us to still do ministry at the same level that we do it, and then from that we grow into the building, we grow into the payment, right? That's the heart behind this. Now, this is where I'm going to pivot to the longer story, but for those of you that wanted the short story, exciting times. We did not think the denomination would do this, and it's a blessing that they're doing it. It's a great opportunity for us. And really, it is this very unique window that opened when we didn't see any other windows opening at all, right? So excited about it. And yes, it's a challenge, but I think it's an accessible challenge, because if I take you through our history, there was a time we saw 1.35 million come in roughly 6 weeks. There was another time we saw 1.5 million come in 5 months. There was another time we did a big push to pay off the hub back in the day, and that was hundreds of thousands in a very small amount of time. Like every time we have a challenge, you guys are awesome, and you're gracious and giving, and your generosity makes it happen. And I really believe that's going to happen again here. So there's the target. Now, let me give you the long story for those who want all the details, right? So when we started working through this, and we saw that number, and we saw that it was going to take $30,000 a month, and we were shy by about $20,000 of being able to accomplish that, we had to really soberly look at the different options that were before us. Because trust me, I have been in the space of having to go bare bones, run on fumes, and the stress that that can create for a church and for a leadership and everything else. I know what it's like to have a building payment that is just a heavy building payment and the impact it has on the overall scope of the ministry. So I'm not one that takes any of this lightly, because I felt the heaviness of those things before. But in light of that, here's kind of the things that we had to look at as a reality. The first reality is, if we want Redemption Church to find its place in Duval, that we plant the flag in our community, the space that we are in and the property that we have is the only viable option that's cost effective. And I know that seems strange, because you're like, this is expensive. And I go, right. But if you start, like, you could go online yourself. You could go and look up the properties in Duval, and you can look at the cost of property that could hold a church, enough parking and a building and everything else. And you realize that just buying the property alone, undeveloped, without any utilities on it, anything else, is already super expensive. And then many properties in our community, if we were to buy the property and want to build on it, we would have to do improvements on the property in a way that we don't have to do improvements per the city in the space that we're currently on. And so just as soon as you get property, you do all the required utility upgrades and everything the city would want for all of the borders of the property. You're into millions of dollars, and you haven't even gotten to the point of what the building would be or how much it would cost or whatever else. And so it's cost prohibitive to build from scratch in Duval, period. And so we looked and said, man, if we're going to do this in Duval, this is the only option we have in any foreseeable way. And so that was the one thing we looked at. So if we said, hey, we could buy that property down the way on 203, or we could buy some property off of Big Rock and we could do it there, we would seriously consider that. Let's sell our property and go get a different one. But when we do the math, it just gets way more expensive to do that. And again, we look and go, well, then this is probably our most cost-effective option. So that was kind of point number one. Point number two, if we had more time, I would advocate that we just continue to save money, right? So I'm a big fan of, hey, let's have a better down payment. Let's not straddle the church or saddle it with a bunch of extra payment per month. I'm not a fan of that, but we don't have time, right? So as I shared, the wetland stuff is going to come into play next year. And as soon as it does, our property is locked down. There's just nothing we'll be able to do with it. And it will be what it is. And so because we don't have a long runway to operate with, we have this really short kind of like Alaska bush plane, like runway that we're operating with. We just knew then that, hey, we have to do something that's now, even though it may have some heavy lifting involved, this is the only window we have in which to do that. Or we look at leaving our community and we don't put our facility in Duval proper. But then let's go down that road for a minute. If it's not in Duval, where exactly do we put it? And if you go online, because I know you're all very smart people, you can do the research, you start looking around at, hey, what kind of buildings could we buy anywhere near Duval that are commercial grade, you could retrofit into a church, and it gets really expensive really quick. In fact, it's hard to find buildings you can buy, but you can find buildings you can lease, and those lease numbers are really, really big. In fact, the lease numbers start to come out to almost the same price as what servicing the mortgage would be, and you don't ever get to pay that off. You're just paying somebody else to the end of time or the end of your church or whatever else, a really large payment, and you don't have any real asset to show for it. And so that kind of limited it as well. And so when we looked at all of this and we had to weigh through, is it wise, right? Because that's the real question. Is it wise to take on this level of debt with that kind of payment, knowing that what we bring in per month and what it's going to take are off by about $20,000? Is it wise to do this? And wisdom can go a lot of different directions. One of the things I love about wisdom is it doesn't always guarantee there's an exact right answer for everything, because in there's nuance, and you have to look at circumstance, environment, other options, different opportunities, and weigh all that out, and then try to plot a course of action that, as you can best see it, is the best thing in the conditions that are before you, right? Not the army that you want to go to war with, but the army that you have to go to war with. Like, that's the way you kind of measure it. And so from that, looking at all these different options, the conclusion was, listen, here's what we can do that splits a difference and buys us some time and gets the building built on the property that we have and gets it underway before it's basically sealed off and we can do nothing with it. We pursued this loan with the Assembly of God. And then in that, what we do is we set aside this rainy day fund of $750,000, and that number can function as a way to augment the monthly differences for at least 2 years, and realistically, I think as far as 3. Now, what's cool about that is if we're growing into the payment, right? So in other words, right now our monthly giving is at $70,000. If we grow into seeing our monthly giving hitting $90,000 on a regular basis or even higher, then that money that we set aside, eventually that money would just get applied toward the loan. We could start dumping bigger amounts into the loan. But if we have to augment our monthly budget with the rainy day fund for a length of time, we've put that on the front end and at least ensured ourselves some time, some space in which to grow into it. And so that's the heart behind this whole thing, is saying, yes, it has some risk involved. Yes, it has some faith involved, but it's not reckless faith. It's not reckless risk, but it kind of finds this middle ground in there where it's like, okay, all things being equal, this is probably the most realistic way in the current set of facts that we have, the most realistic way in which to see this accomplished, right? And so we spent a lot of time as a leadership team, as our elders, looking at all the different options, the different nuances, weighing it all out. And our conclusion was, hey, what is real is what is before us, right? And so what's real is we have until next summer or the window closes. What is real is we have a denomination that's willing to lend to us. What is real is we cannot make that payment as things currently are. And so we need to do something to augment it for a season. And from that, what is real is saying, hey, 2 to 3 years of funds brought forth on the front end is the best way to augment that over a longer haul and then grow into the payment. Now, let me go down another road for a minute, because I'm sure some of you would say, well, wouldn't it be wiser and better if we raise $750,000 to put that toward the loan amount and bring it down more and bring the monthly payment down more? And that's a better way forward. And we worked through a lot of those numbers as well. So let me see if I can give you some sense of perspective. If it costs $30,000 to service the full amount of the loan right now, so we were able to raise, let's say, $2.3 million to bring that down to half. That would make our monthly payment $15,000 instead of $30,000, which would be fantastic. I'd take a $15,000 over a $30,000. But with that said, our average we're bringing in is $70,000. Our operating budget, when it's fully operating, is about $62,000 a month. We seem to, on average, spend about $57,000 a month because we are frugal in what we do, and we could go bare bones at about $52,000 a month, right? And so even when you still do the math, if we applied half of an amount toward the loan amount and we brought it down by half, our monthly payment relative to our budget would still be kind of above what we're bringing in on a monthly average, right? And we know that realistically, we're not going to be raising $2.3 million in the next couple of weeks or next 2 months or whatever it is, right? So as we looked at it, we're like, we would love to be able to pay that loaned amount down, but we still know that it's going to take a while before we have the capacity to bring in enough monthly to cover everything that we need to cover. And so instead, how about we go ahead and just do this idea of the rainy day fund, use it as an augmenting tool as we grow into things. And so now one of the things that we've kind of talked about that I'm committed to in this idea, though, is every year, at the end of the year, if we have surpluses, so we brought in this much and we spent that much, and what we spent was less than what we brought in, we want to take those surpluses every year and apply them against the loan, because we're fans of not having debt. We're fans of getting this retired as rapidly as possible. But what we really kind of looked at here is saying what we really need to do is buy time. And so instead of saying, let's try to borrow less by raising more and putting it toward that, I would love to do that too. Like both are an option, but we really still know that we need to have that augmentation element. And that's why we're kind of going down that road, right? But we want to, again, in the midst of this, as much as we can, be paying down the loan as rapidly as we can and kind of going that route. Now, what's cool about doing this with the Assemblies of God, here's a couple of things. One is there is no prepayment penalty. So they're fans of us not being in debt too. And so they're not going to penalize us if we're able to kind of take bites of this down the road in bigger and bigger ways, right? So that's kind of one element of this. The other thing, which is really cool as opposed to borrowing from a bank, is the fund of the AG. I'll stop calling it Assemblies of God and just call it AG here on out. But this fund is actually the pension fund of their pastors. And so the loan we have and the interest we're paying, that's going to pastors' retirements in their denomination. And I go, that's really cool. In other words, we're not wasting the money with the cost and the interest and everything else. We're taking that and we're reinvesting it into kingdom stuff. And I go, what a cool blessing, right? So it's almost like it's a closed system of kingdom values in play. They're helping us and we're helping them, and it's all related to Jesus. And I think that's way more exciting than it was just a local bank and we're paying interest and it's just a money-making venture. And so that part of it is really, really great as well. The interest rate that the Assembly of God is offering to us is really not that different than what we would be getting from a private lending institution. It's 6.5%, which, you know, right now maybe sounds a little high, but we all have to think, oh yeah, things have been adjusting recently, and that's part of it. It's a commercial project. That's part of it too. And so, you know, as we talk to some of our specialists, they're like, yeah, this interest rate is really not all that different than what you'd be getting from a bank. And they're giving you a lot more flexibility on other things, as well as the fact that they're willing to kind of take a risk with you that lending institutions may not be as willing to take, because they understand the dynamics of churches in a way that banks really don't. And so that's another giant blessing in the midst of this as well. And so when we look at all of that, we say, okay, based on the conditions that are before us, based on the property that we have, based on the timeline that's been set, based on things that we can't control, this is the best option for us to be able to try to accomplish this. Now, in that, I'm going to give you another personal note. I'm a big fan of transparency. I'm a big fan of, hey, let facts be our friends. But as a staff and as those who are on the payroll of the church, we had to look at that and say, we understand the risk involved for us personally. In other words, if we bring in $70,000 a month as a church and the building payment's going to be $30,000, that leaves $40,000 for everything else. And the lowest bare bones thing that we operate off of is about $52,000 a month. I know these are rapid numbers coming at you, but basically it means, hey, we'd be $12,000 short, and that would mean we'd have to do salary cuts, lay off staff. That kind of risk is certainly built into the equation in this. In other words, the church could make the building payment. It may not be able to make the payroll, right? Like that would be the worst case scenario, and we understand that as a staff. And we're willing to shoulder that personal risk for this cause. So we're not blindly going into it. Nobody has like building lust here, where they're like, we just want a building so bad, let's just go flying into this blind. No, eyes are wide open as we're looking at this. We know that there is, in steps of faith, levels of risk, but we think this is calculated enough that if we get that number on the front end, then that gives us, again, the space that we need to, get things up and running, and hopefully from that as a church grow, and from that be able to hold down that bigger payment, but do it in a way that's a little bit more controlled and sane, as opposed to we just jump right into it and we're trying to figure out how we can make up the difference of $30,000 every month come day one, because we couldn't. Because part of the other detail here is, we're putting $3.5 million down, and right now we have about $3.56 million in the bank. So we would, day one, have $60,000 in the bank, right? And if we're short $30,000 or $20,000, whatever the number might be that we're short by, we would run out of savings really fast, right? So hence the $750,000 gives us the flexibility to breathe and to develop as we go, right? And then we know that by the end of 2 years or 3 years, if that's, again, this rainy day fund is just depleted and we haven't made the gains that we were hoping for, we understand as a staff that begins to wash up on our shore, and we have to worry about or think through at least difficult decisions and how we navigate that. but we know that. That's what I'm trying to say to you. We understand that, but we believe in the cause. We believe in the project. We're willing to take on the risk because we believe that God's doing great stuff. And all the way through, he just keeps opening doors and we keep walking through doors, right? And I believe that's exactly what this is as well. Again, anybody that knows me knows I'm a little bit more risk averse. That's my personality type. When I enter a room, I sit against a wall. You know what I mean? I'm risk averse. I'm always looking for exit strategies and plans, and I want everything to be perfectly laid out. And for me, even this plan, I feel pretty comfortable with, considering my personality type. So that's what's before us. And the other way I look at this is if we don't get to the number by October 1st, then I go, okay, that's not the open door then. That closes that door, and there could be some other door at that point. I don't know. But right now, based on time, facts, reality, options, and opportunities, that's our target, right? So hopefully I've tried to get ahead and answer some of the questions that you may have, but there may be some stuff I'm missing. And I want to be clear in this too. I know there's some of you that are probably a bit like me and you're more risk averse and you go, yeah, I just think we should raise more money first, or yeah, I don't think we should take on that kind of load. And I feel the same way, but I also know I have no other options. At this point, I have zero other options because of, again, the factors that are before us. If I had another option, even if it was kind of an odd one, I would kind of look at it. But all the other options are not realistic options, or they're so much more costly in the end. This is just cost effective. So, but you might have other questions and you might want to process through this a little bit more. And we're totally cool with that. Like, we get that some of us will go like, yep, I'm in, let's do it. And others are gonna be like, I need to work it through more. Hey, that's totally cool. We get it. We want to be here for you. Let us know if you have questions. Let us know if you have some really unique solution to our problem and we go down that road, because we talked about different things. We talked about the bond program idea a little bit. And the challenge with the bonds, I'll give you a couple of different challenges. One is finding an institution that's still willing to do bonds for churches is hard to come by. That's one. Two, they take a while to get ramped up anyway, technically. Three, you have to make sure you get to the full amount during that time or you just can't do it. And if we had a lot of people coming forward saying, hey, we want to make an investment into the church of substantial sums, and so we kind of had this sense of, yeah, we're going to be able to get to $4.7 million fast with bonds, that would be one thing. But so far we haven't had that kind of input. And so it would take a lot of time, months worth of time to ramp that up, and it still may not work out in the end. And then the other thing, just being transparent, I don't love the idea of churches and church members being in a financial relationship of lender and borrower. That just seems like if there's anything you want to keep out of the context of a community of faith, it's lenders and borrowers in the same church. It just seems like that can have its own set of challenges. And so for all those reasons, we're like, man, we were open to it, but it would be, like not the road we would really want to go down. And this idea of doing it with a denomination that isn't connected to us. We're not joining the Assemblies of God to do this. We're just being able to benefit from a denomination being willing to help us, but it still kind of makes it third party from our community of faith. And I think that's a real blessing, but it lets us bless their community of faith by helping their pastors in retirement. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody involved. But that's kind of why we didn't go down the bond road as well. So that's it. I don't think I need to recap any of that at this point. You kind of get the idea. $750,000. 7 weeks rather. We need to raise $750,000 in 7 weeks. We raise more than that. We'll dump it right toward the loan as fast as we can. And if we don't get to that number, then we realize like, hey, it's not going to be doable because we know that we don't want to overstress and overtax the church either. We need to have that time that's bought because it's going to take a year plus just to build it. So in some ways, we're having to make payments on a thing that we're not living in yet. And so even with that, our expenses will be higher in other ways as we're getting through that season. And so all the more the buying of time becomes really, really critical. And this was the best roadmap that we could come up with to make that possible. And I believe we'll do it. I really do. I look at every other challenge we've ever had in the history of our church and man, like God makes a way, you know what I mean? And God uses you to make the way. And that's what I'm excited about. So questions, let us know. If you want to do big contributions, make it by check. The idea is raising $750,000 above and beyond our general giving. So don't just reallocate your general giving to building. You can give to the building fund to hit the 750, but we need to kind of realize that, hey, we're all going to be making some unique contributions that are above what we normally do, because that's really what's key here. And part of that is because the denomination is asking the question, hey, can you guys raise some more funds? Because that was part of what they wanted clarified, right? Can you guys actually generate more revenue right now? And we're showing them, yes, we can, because that's what they want to know. Like, in a pinch, you guys can do things. And that's what this really kind of has as its essence too. It's showing them, hey, we can take this seriously. We can take on the challenge. We can step up and we can really make things happen. And so I believe it's going to happen. And I believe Jesus is looking out for us. And so thanks for the time of watching this video. Hopefully it felt way more encouraging than the last one, because I think it is too. And I'm just floored by what's even opened up in the last couple of weeks. And I love it because it's not all just easy peasy, right? It's got responsibility to it. It's got some challenge to it. It's got some faith to it, but it also has some really great, like, light at the end of the tunnel options. And I would love to see this October, September, whatever it is, dirt starting to move down on the 203 for God's glory and for the good of our city. Hey, you guys, thanks so much for the video, as far as taking the time again to watch it. And yeah, let's get after it, because I think it would be awesome to get that number pounded out as soon as possible, and we can get underway. All right, guys, thanks. Peace.